Hi, everybody. My name is Catherine Levy. I'm a member of the Executive Committee of NIPAN, and I'm going to be the moderator for these two extraordinary people who are associated with this film. I'm so glad that everyone joined us. This is the largest attendance that we have had for any of our screenings. I don't want to go over the ground that George so ably covered at the beginning of the evening about NIPAN. I just want to say a couple of things. NIPAN is a statewide progressive organization. We have a number of chapters from Long Island, where I am, to upstate New York. We are dedicated to the belief that all people have the right to live in safe, just, and sustainable world. We very much believe that means striving for peace globally, nationally, and in our own communities. Last year, we began this film series in order to foster constructive dialogue and promote our vision. Our first film was called Boycott. It's very closely related to this film, and if you haven't seen it, I suggest that you watch it. It's a terrific film. We've also screened films about reparations, the American hospital system, and the Green New Deal. But I think that I can safely say that we have never screened a film that's as vital and timely as Israelism is. And so we are really delighted that the co-director of the film, Erin Axelman, and one of the people who appears in it, who closes out the film effectively in a very inspirational way, Rabbi Grossman, are appearing with us today. I'm just going to briefly give introductions to them. Their biographies are very long, so I'm going to have to cut out a lot of important information. Erin Axelman is a queer Jewish filmmaker based out of Somerville, Massachusetts. Israelism is their directorial debut. That's quite a debut. Erin and Sam founded Tikkun Olam Productions, a nonprofit filmmaking collective that focuses on documenting and supporting movements for justice. In addition to Israelism, they are currently producing the upcoming feature documentary, Generation Green New Deal, and that title certainly makes me want to see that film. Rabbi Miriam Grossman is a Jewish educator, ritual leader, and writer. She is the former rabbi of Congregation Kolat HaYamnu. Today, Rabbi Miriam is the co-chair of Tirdof, New York Jewish Clergy for Justice, a member leader with Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. I want to thank you both for this film. I think I said to somebody on your team that I feel like I've been waiting for this film all of my life. So I'm going to begin with you, Erin. I'd love to know what first compelled you to make this film. And if you could talk a little as well about how you chose that provocative and distinctive title for the film.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all so much for being here. It means so much that you're all here. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Ting. Thank you, Rabbi Miriam. Again, it's so great to get to do stuff with you. We've done a couple virtual screenings together the past few months. Yeah, so we started making this film about 8 years ago at this point. It took us about 7 years to make, 6.5 years from our first interview to our world premiere, which was a long time, a pretty significant portion of my life. And it's very roughly based off my own story, and more closely based on the story of many of my closest friends. I grew up in a very small Jewish community in rural Maine. So my parents were kind of back to land hippie types in Bernie Sanders' generation and wanted to live in the middle of the woods, which they did. And so I was one of the only Jewish kids in my high school, which was a relatively isolating experience. And I experienced, very mild anti-Semitism growing up, people believing in Jewish conspiracy theories, which at the time I hoped they were joking about. And now those kids are adults and I realized they believe those conspiracy theories and, vote for Trump. Our area voted overwhelmingly for Trump. Formulating a positive Jewish identity as a young person in a overwhelmingly conservative Christian area was difficult. But after my bar mitzvah, when I was given books about Israel, especially the book Exodus by Leon Uris, I totally fell in love with the kind of traditional pro-Israel narrative. It really, as a person who didn't grow up in a huge Jewish community, learning about Israel felt like my way of connecting to my larger Jewish community. And Israel really became the center of my Jewish identity. What made me excited about the Torah, what made me excited about going to synagogue, it really felt like the story of Israel, the modern story of Israel, was a story that I could really connect to and feel that I could relate to. And it was incredibly empowering, especially as someone who, again, felt, different. It made me feel like I was part of a much larger and beautiful, heroic story of redemption and reinvention. And for many years, especially in high school, Israel really was my Jewish identity. My senior year of high school, at my kind of random public high school in rural Maine, you could do a independent study for your entire senior year, and where you basically make a documentary at the end. And I was going to do one on the history of Israel and make a documentary on the history of Israel, obviously a very pro-Israel documentary. And at one point early in the year, the teacher, who was neither Jewish or Palestinian, just a progressive Irish guy, just asked me, he's like, do you know anything about Palestinian history? And because the narratives that I read didn't really talk about Palestinians at all, it was really Arabs, if anything, I said, no, I don't know anything about Palestinian history. It wasn't necessarily threatening. I just didn't know. And so over the course of that year, he gave me all of these books from both Palestinian authors as well as Israeli historians, left-wing Israeli historians. And my mind was opened. And I came to realize that the narrative that I had fallen in love with was not the whole story. It was a very one-dimensional narrative, and that there was essentially no room for the Palestinians in the traditional pro-Israel narrative. The traditional pro-Israel narrative only really viewed Palestinians as an obstacle to the dreams of the Zionist movement, and not as their own full-fledged people with their own history and their own civilization, who were essentially minding their own business when the movement that we call Zionism began. So once I kind of came into contact with Palestinian narratives in high school, I became fascinated about why the pro-Israel narrative had been so compelling to me and had been such a powerful narrative, and why I'd been so attached to it. When I got to college, I met many people. I was one of the only Jewish kids in my high school. The college I went to was about 15–20% Jewish. So I met tons of people who had gone to Jewish day school, for whom Israel really was the center of their Jewish identity from their very earliest memories, and I actually found out about Simone through mutual friends in college. And a lot of them had been told that the college that we went to was super left-wing, that they had to go and defend Israel, and that these people really thought that it was, to be a good Jewish person, they needed to defend Israel at all costs, but they never met Palestinians. And I saw what happened over and over and over and over again, what happened when they met Palestinians and when they came into contact with Palestinian narratives. And I saw their heartbreak, and I saw their despair, and I saw the fracturing of their previous identity as they began to realize that the narrative they had built their identity around was not the whole story, and totally omitted the Palestinian narrative and the goals and dreams of the Palestinian people. So I began to realize that my own story of transformation was part of this much larger community-wide story of transformation that was occurring really amongst my generation, obviously generations above me too as well. And then a couple of years after college, I was in grad school for education, and we had to create a paper on an interesting community. And I was like, oh, I'll make one on Jews critical of Israel. And then I was like, oh, maybe I'll make a short video of that. And I was like, well, that could be an interesting documentary. And then I kind of had the idea that I would make it into a documentary, even though I never made a feature-length film before. And I was able to bring on a really amazing co-director, my co-director Sam, and that was 8 years ago at this point. And we're really honored that people are watching our film and are connecting with our film, and we're especially grateful that it can be a resource, in these devastating times. And when it comes to, really quickly, the word Israelism, that wasn't the initial title. We had a much longer, worse title, and then my co-director was like, the title's not good. And he was right. And so we were trying to figure out, a really short title that would get at the strange and changing American Jewish relationship to Israel. And someone in one of our interviews said the word pro-Israelism. And that was really, it hit me. And people have used the word Israelism on the left and right for a couple decades, just not very frequently. And it seemed like a really interesting word to show and demonstrate the ways in which Israel has become the center, or had become the center of many American Jews' identity. And in some ways had actually replaced Judaism as the core kind of tenet of American Jewish identity. And that was certainly the case for me. So now, we're really grateful that the term, we hope to kind of help coin that term and make that term more popular. I think it does a good job of describing American Zionism, or kind of this kind of obsession with Israel that many of us had, as well as the change that's happening in our community.
Thank you. I find that choice of title really wonderful and important to the film. Rabbi Grossman, the film ends on a hopeful note with this wonderful conversation you're having with people. But let's face it, those are people who are rather convinced. I have to tell you that I had people I tried to drag to this screening tonight, and I couldn't get them here. So I'm going to ask you a question that I think is central to the film and to what we're struggling with right now, which has bedeviled me for decades, which is why can't we have rigorous, searching, reasonable conversations about Israel with people who are not already convinced? And is there any way to break through? Because I, for myself, have not found that.
Fair questions. Well, first of all, I'm really, I'm grateful to be here tonight. And, Erin, very grateful for all the work of your team in this film. And I just want to also say that I think because I'm in the film, sometimes I sort of falsely get the credit of sort of having been part of the team in some way. And so I just want to say I'm very grateful for the team that I could just come in that moment. And that all, full, total, all, it was in beautiful hands beyond me. I think that's a fair question and a hard question. I think there's a few parts to it. I think, there's sort of the question of why, and then there's the question of what to do about it, which are different questions. I think the question of why is it so hard? I think that there's many reasons. I mean, I think people have such deep ties and attachments, some of which are rooted in love of specific people in their life, some of which are rooted in trauma, some of which are rooted in fear, sometimes fears that are born out of real lived experiences, and sometimes that are inherited and that people have not experienced. And so I think all of those things make for a much more heightened starting place of conversation. I think also, to some extent, as human beings, I think people sometimes, there's many reasons people dig their heels down into something. And I certainly have done that on a number of issues in my life or relationships. And so I think that the question then of what to do about it is maybe a little bit disappointing, which is I think that slow, continued, respectful conversation, which is not so mobilizing or catalyzing of an answer. I think everybody plays different roles in that work and conversation. So for instance, I think, Palestinians in my life, I think do not have any obligation to sort of slowly stick with it with people to sort of prove their humanity to someone. No one should ever be in that position, I think. For me as a rabbi, I think it's the full opposite end of the spectrum, where I think I have signed up to have an obligation to have these conversations for my whole life, with a great deal of patience. And then I think for everyone in between, it's just a question of how much how movable, how available, how open does a conversation seem? And I think it's not about beating your head against the wall. I think it's about leaving seeds, and then you never know years later what can come to fruition because of what you were sort of brave enough to say. And to say also, I guess, that I think it's all a very delicate balance of, sort of, as I say at the end of the film, I believe in action and I believe in organizing. And so I think there's a lot of those are not the same thing as sort of having respectful, unfortunately slow conversations over years or decades that doesn't preclude action along the way, as I think most of us know and believe. So I think it's sort of like we have to walk and chew gum, or some other metaphor. We have to one has to be able to be in hard, slow conversations over time. I guess the last thing I'll say also is that, I remember the first time I sort of went to a gathering of like-minded Jewish folks, and we had a big Havdalah. And I remember thinking, oh, I had not imagined what I would find. I had only imagined what I would lose. And so I do think sometimes you convince, or not convince, compel, move people through what you create that can be compelling and inspiring. and sort of, say people want to enter a warm house, they don't want to only leave into the cold. And so I think the more we can sort of do all these things at once, like build compelling Jewish spaces that are rooted in the liberation of all people, organize, and have slow, long, hard conversations when it feels like there's a door open to have them. Different tracks happening all at once over the course of years.
Okay, what kind of converted you? I mean, I found Erin's story surprising, actually, because I thought it would be more like mine and Simone's. What
Sure.
changed your mind about Israel?
Sure. Yeah, I will say, I've sometimes said that there could be a sequel of the secular story, more secular story. My story is more similar to Simone's. I grew up in a what's called a community day school, and I often say it was an Orthodox run community day school. Many of the students were modern Orthodox, and the teachers were sort of to the right of that. And Israel was very much at the center entirely. And I was very passionate about that. I ultimately, what sort of opened my eyes to sort of this question of the Nakba and this question of Palestinian displacement and everything that has happened since then was initially, I mean, really a few elements, but one, I've written and spoken about this in other places, but in my my junior year of college, I went to Standing Rock Reservation. This was before it was sort of became on the national stage through the No Dapple fight, the pipeline fight. But before then, I went as an intern to fight a different pipeline and to work with the Tribal Historic Preservation Office of the reservation. And a very dear friend, expressed to me essentially that she understood what it is to have a connection to land, and that and Holy Land, and that she said that she, was moved to see that Jews had access to lands and spaces that were holy to us. And then she said, but there's no more oppressed people than my people, except the Palestinian people, which was a formulation that really blew me away, because she was acknowledging that there is a liturgical sacred connection to the land, as multiple religions have, but that does not justify or sweep aside the realities of Palestinian dignity, self-determination, and all of these things. So that was really the very first thing that opened the door for me. And the second was in college. I also had a Palestinian friend, and just hearing her experiences of life, and ultimately visiting her, really opened my eyes. And she is a Palestinian citizen of Israel. So I think I could sort of see if she was really denigrated and dehumanized in many ways that I was witness to. She is sort of considered at the highest top of the hierarchy, the sort of that is Palestinians are sort of sorted into by the Israeli government. I was sort of that blew open for me this real need to learn a lot and quickly, because she was kind of who I had been told my whole life was sort of, there's no problem because look at folks like this. And she was sort of saying to me, I am Palestinian just as people in Gaza are Palestinian, and so that was really the beginning of a long and journey that I'm grateful that, my story in it, it has people over years who are willing to continue to talk to me. So I think that's part of why I try to hold open space for others, because I see myself in people who maybe haven't learned these histories yet.
And I'll just add on one thing. It is difficult to get people to change, as you talked about before, but people do change. I mean, again, they change all the time, and that's why we have this story, is because so many people have changed, and it's very difficult to figure out what makes individual people change. I think, as Miriam said, you have to just keep trying, because you never know what's going to make someone change. And some of my friends, who were kind of diehard Israel supporters, they changed quite quickly when they came into contact with Palestinian narratives the first time, when they heard stories of the occupation. Other people, as Miriam said, took 10 years. The head of Brown Students for Israel, that kind of my nemesis on campus when I was on campus, he was pretty awful in college. He did overtly racist things to Palestinians. He harassed Palestinians at events. After college, he went to work for the ADL actually for a period of time, but he began to realize that something was wrong. And I don't know what got him to change. It took him about 10 years. It was only actually partway through the making of the film that he really began to change. But even he now does pro-Palestinian human rights work. He openly calls it apartheid. He openly, talks about the Nakba. And he was someone who, again, was as diehard as you could possibly be. He literally went and worked for the ADL. And so again, I never give up on people, because if he can change, and he represented to like all the Palestinian students on campus, he was the worst. He was the one that people really had a very difficult time with. So if he can change, then I truly believe anybody can change. And again, obviously, we hope people will change early in their lives, but there's always opportunities to change. And it's also been really wonderful in my own family. My relatives in their 60s, 70s, and 80s have been willing to look reality in the eye, who grew up believing that Israel was the light at the end of the tunnel, the savior of the Jewish people. But they too are willing to look it in the eye. So again, it's difficult because because many of our identities are tied to Israel. When we begin to challenge Israel, it often feels like we're challenging our own identities and communities, which is very difficult. Which I think that's why building these progressive Jewish communities is so important. But again, change is possible, and I've seen it for so many people, and it takes a long time, but people really do change on this issue.
I mean, obviously, you wouldn't have made the film if you didn't think that change was possible. What do you suggest one says to people who are beginning to see themselves as anti-Zionists, but only just beginning? Or what resources would you suggest to them? And that's for either of you. I mean, your film is a good beginning, but obviously there have to be many other things that people can do to begin that. What is a painful journey for people, I find.
Yeah, Miriam, if you want to start off this one.
Yeah, I think there's many things. I mean, I think one is just to continue to read and to learn deeply. I think both sort of past Palestinian thinkers, contemporary Palestinian thinkers, and then sort of Jewish solidarity activists and writers. And I say that because I think, we live in a very, what's the word? Sloganeering, fast-paced, internet-driven world. And that I think there is a way where that can be both overwhelming, sometimes inaccurate, and can maybe obscure the truth, not the truth, but the depths of history in ways that actually are more accessible if we just, crack open some really serious thinkers on it. So, I would really recommend Edward Said, The Question of Palestine. I think that in addition to sort of reading about the history and reading more contemporary writers and thinkers, I do think it's helpful to sort of check out into your area. I know everyone here is in the kind of broader New York area, perhaps further. I would say that to find values-aligned communities, Jewish communities, communities that are not Jewish, whatever it looks like, to sort of be with other people, it can make that process much less painful, because I think, again, there is this sort of threat of alienation. And for many people, that is something that becomes real. And I think this is a time where people are risking a lot. I would argue that Palestinians and Palestinian Americans have sort of risked the most and are most likely to be doxxed, most likely to, be fired for taking a public position, all of these things. There's risk for us too. I feel risk in this time, and so I think risk is always better assessed in a more level-headed way when we are moving in community. And I love that people are continuing to put recommendations in the chat. I think that's a great idea. And I think that's sort of one of the things that also learning and studying and being in community as you're looking at new resources can do. It's always then, when's the next?
One person in the chat asked a question, which I've been thinking about a lot too. The film premiered before the notorious October 7th. And I remember watching it, and I was feeling a lot of hope watching it, because I felt that you were opening up questions that very few people had asked. outside of the narrow circles that I travel in. And then October 7th happened. So what have you seen a difference in reaction to the film from before October 7th to now? And do you yourself feel differently about the film?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, obviously, about the timing of all this is so wild. We released like our initial big national tour dates and our trailer like 2 weeks before October 7th. So it was pretty wild. We had just begun a big national tour. I was trying to like take a break that weekend and not look at my phone, and then turn my phone at like 4 in the afternoon, and the world changed. And it was obviously devastating. There's members of our team that are American Jewish, Israeli, and Palestinian. Everyone on our team basically knows someone who's been killed or kidnapped, or have multiple people who've been killed or kidnapped. Someone that I worked with in 2011 in Israel, an amazing anti-occupation activist. Both his parents were killed on October 7th. And we were all shell shocked for a bit. Most of the organizers who were doing screenings with decided to postpone for the initial week after October 7th, so we didn't do any screenings for that week. And we weren't sure what was going to happen. And then as I thought would likely happen, Israel began reacting how many of us thought they would, which is to start this essentially indiscriminate mass bombing campaign. Which is obviously ongoing and genocidal. I didn't use the word genocide, for the first almost 2 months, but it's gotten to the point where I feel comfortable using that word, especially because of the explicit language of Israeli ministers and Israeli leaders in reference to Gaza. I think dynamics have simply kind of continued the path that they were already on before October 7th in terms of, I think, U.S. dynamics and American Jewish dynamics. I think our community has become even more polarized since October 7th, but I think the transformation that has been ongoing for many years and many decades is accelerating. I think although this is a moment of polarization, this also, I think, is an unveiling moment as more and more American Jews, although we were, of course, horrified by what happened on October 7th, if we were horrified by what happened on October 7th, we also should be horrified by 20 times more people being killed, obviously, in Gaza, and many of us are. And so I think, not for the first time, but I think more and more American Jews now are seeing the language of Netanyahu and his ministers and seeing the indiscriminate bombings and killings of children in the Gaza Strip. And it's accelerating this transformation that we've seen and that the film details. We won't know in terms of polling for, I think, probably quite a long time what effect this moment will have on American Jewish dynamics. But it seems, at least qualitatively, that it's continuing the kind of the patterns that the film talks about and that we saw before October 7th. And I think, for us in terms of, as filmmakers, people, we've been releasing short videos and kind of extra material from our film for many months online. And then, about, 5-6 days after October 7th, and our film was getting some notoriety, but not a huge amount. And then after October 7th, I think people were really looking for resources, nuanced resources about this moment and about the American relationship to Israel-Palestine. So people kind of began discovering our social media pages and just sharing our stuff, and kind of our videos just started going viral, and people began becoming incredibly interested in our film, and demand just went through the roof. And so we decided that we were going to, keep the tour back on. We began before October 7th. There was quite a bit of backlash to our film. There were attempts to censor our film before October 7th, and we knew there always would be. Making a film like this, that's essentially inevitable. But after October 7th as well, the interest skyrocketed, and then the backlash went through the roof as well. So a number of pro-Israel activists kind of saw our film as just a horrible piece of kind of quote unquote anti-Israel media. And because it was on tour and because it was making the rounds, people began to see it as, well, they wanted to do something. What they could do was try to cancel our film. And so there began all these pretty wild smear campaigns against our film, primarily from people who hadn't actually watched the film, where, a lot of the universities and venues that we're screening at basically started getting at first thousands and then tens of thousands of emails. So the record is some universities have gotten over 50,000 emails telling them to cancel screenings of our film, almost all automated. In some ways, that actually has helped us because the rhetoric of those email campaigns are so unhinged and so crazy, and talk about our film in totally wild ways. When the administrators or the press then watch our film, our film seems incredibly reasonable compared to what these kind of trolls are saying. So those, and again, there's been virtually no successful cancellations of our film. Many people have tried. Again, there's been attempted cancellations at UPenn, at Hunter, obviously, at this place in this theater in Canada, as well as at Yale. I can't say yet, but there's a large university that is attempting to ban all screenings of our film right now in the New York area. And we'll have more news on that very soon. It's going to be very interesting.
You're not going to tell us which one.
I found out today, and it's the professors are organizing right now, so they want to keep it. They want to keep it on the low, but it's going to be interesting. But we're going to fight every single time, and I think again, the attempts to cancel our film prove the point of our film, and they prove what you mentioned earlier, is that why can't we just have conversations about this topic? It's an important topic. The story of transformation that we talk about is an incredibly common story, to the point where almost 40% of young American Jews think Israel is an apartheid state. So our beliefs and our viewpoints and our story is incredibly common, and we are a massive proportion of the Jewish community. So when people try to censor our film and censor these conversations, it really proves the point. And that the point is that a very large percentage of our community is terrified of this conversation and is terrified of any critical discourse on Israel. And so because our film now is providing that, it's providing that critical discourse, it's become our life's work, and we're going to see it through and, keep showing the film as long as it's relevant. And we think that's probably going to be many years. So it's obviously been a totally chaotic and overwhelming few months. We just announced a couple of days ago, 40 screenings in the next 45 days. Which is great. So we have another one happening right now, actually, at Vassar, that Simone and Rebecca Vilkomerson are doing, which is great. We're going to be on the road most of next week, and we're going to start doing a lot of international screenings in March and April. And for anybody here, I just posted it in the chat as well, but for people who weren't able to make it, please share this. Israelism is available to rent anywhere in the world right now. I put the link in the chat, so please share with your friends and family members if you can. That would be amazing.
Wow.
So you used a term that I love, unveiling. And I hate to speak of hope when children are starving as we're speaking. I mean, the situation, as I'm sure you both know, in Gaza is beyond horrific. It's pretty bad in the West Bank as well. But Rabbi Grossman, you've written very tellingly about hope. Do you see any hope in this moment? And what would you say would be, and please, Erin, you comment on this too, if you wish, what would you see as the best way to use this film at this moment in the attempt to at least open up the conversation?
Yeah, a few things. I think one thing I want to say first is to some of the questions I think that are coming to us as panelists. I think that there is not one way that people are sort of resisting the violence of this moment, and I think that there is a sort of spectrum that is a coalition when it comes to fighting for ceasefire, and that includes everything from JVP as an organization which is anti-Zionist to If Not Now, which it takes no position on Zionism, to groups in Israel Palestine, like Standing Together, made up of Israelis and Palestinians. And I think that what matters most is sort of coming together at ceasefire is the minimum, and yet it is such a massive fight and endeavor in this moment. So I guess I want to say that if you sort of are thinking to yourself, oh, I hear myself not exactly here, not exactly there, I would encourage you to continue looking, because there are a lot of different frameworks that are coalescing in action that I think is totally critical. And there are different ways to sort of find your avenue is. I think what matters is that we search and find it and act. And I think for me, action is where hope lies. I believe as a rabbi in the power of ritual. And there is a sense that I find out what I believe through what I do. I don't believe belief is manifest just in my heart. I think I make it real in my life to whatever I believe about life and about humanity through what I do. And so I think that is true politically and in terms of our shared humanity as well. And I think there is tragedy and despair and grief that is really beyond words in this time, and somehow just continues to become worse and worse and worse. And in the piece that I wrote that was shared, let's build a room for hope. I wrote that I don't have hope right now. What I have and what I need to do is not to hope, but what I need to build a space for hope, a place where hope could come, a space or a pathway for hope. And so for me, that looks like action. For me, that looks like multiracial, multi-faith, collective organizing for the shared humanity of all Israelis and all Palestinians and all Americans and all people. And to not stop in that fight. I think to a certain extent, we take turns holding the hope baton for each other. And sometimes no one can hold the baton. And yet if we keep moving forward, I think that is all that history will show. It doesn't show internally, if we believed it would work, if we believed we could keep going, history only shows what we do. And so I think for me, that's the root of things, is can we find a way together to continue to keep acting? And that is how we create a future of shared safety for all people, in that land, in this land, in every land.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. In terms of, I guess, how to use the film, we really tried to make the film, and we did tons of test screenings, for a couple of years when we were towards the end of post-production. We really wanted to make it something that, progressive American Jews really saw themselves in, that Palestinians really saw themselves in and related to, and that also that we made a film that was digestible enough for someone who knew nothing about the topic, and that it at least provided a kind of understandable narrative for people who were just getting into Israel-Palestine. So in some ways, we hope the film can kind of introduce the topic and the movement for Palestinian liberation to general audiences. We hope it can kind of push people along who are already doing the work and help motivate them and kind of keep them going. And also, I mean, from a very practical standpoint, and we obviously didn't intend this in the beginning, but now because there's so much censorship going on, and our film is now kind of in the middle of it. We're using our film, as a tool to kind of test these censorship rules, and as a fuel to kind of fight censorship, and to really kind of prove how absurd and ridiculous a lot of the attempts to censor Palestinian voices and voices critical of Israel are. And so that's why when people try to cancel our film, we fight back, and it's helped us because the attacks are so ridiculous. Even a couple of days ago, we did a screening at Harvard a couple of weeks before October 7th, and there's a student at Harvard, a couple students, right-wing students who are suing Harvard, saying that Harvard's a bastion of anti-Semitism. And the New York Times covered it a few days ago, and one of the big piece of evidence that these students submitted for why Harvard was anti-Semitic was that they showed Israelism. And it's so ridiculous because literally it was an Israeli professor who hosted us. It was literally an Israeli professor who hosted us. 3 of the 4 panelists were Jewish. 2 of them had actually served in the Israeli military. So it's like, it's so absurd when people call that anti-Semitic, when it's like, we're all Jews. It's like, what are you talking about? And I think our film can then show that hypocrisy and show that ridiculousness. Because oftentimes, a lot of the universities that that have tried to censor us have said, well, we're doing this for safety. This film, we're not going to show the film because of safety reasons. And what they're essentially saying is Jewish safety. But we say, but it's Jewish students who are asking us to come. It's Jewish organizers asking us. The panel is Jewish. The film is about American Jews, made by American Jews. What Jewish people are you talking about? We are the Jewish community. And so I think what we can use our film to do is kind of, is to shine a light on the dangerous conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and show that, again, and demonstrate in public that we as Jews of conscience must fight for Palestinian liberation while also fighting anti-Semitism, and that we can have these conversations and do this work in public proudly. So that's what we're trying to do in this moment. Again, it's very bizarre. That's what we're doing. And in terms of hope, I mean, I think communities are coming together. I think both progressive Jewish communities and Palestinian communities and communities of allies are coming together in this moment, and the world is seeing what Israel's policies look like. I mean, I'll post an article that came out in Time yesterday in the chat right here. Public opinion of Israel globally has tanked the past 2 months, and there's so many countries that had net favorable views of Israel that no longer do. And I think this moment is showing the rest of the world how dehumanized the Palestinians have become and how horrific Israel's actions to the Palestinians are. And although obviously it's, it's beyond horrific what's happening, the world is seeing it now. And hopefully things will change because of that.
I also hope that, and I feel for myself, that we can increasingly say there's more than one way to be Jewish.
Yes.
I'm Jewish. I'm not anti-Semitic. I believe in Tikkun Olam. I've spent my life trying to repair the world, and my point of view is valid too. And my people are Mahmoud Darwish and Mossab Abu Taha, not Benjamin Netanyahu. So it's complex being Jewish at this moment, but the two of you are such inspiring people. The movie, I think, is seminal. And I know that you didn't intend for it to come out at this horrible moment, obviously, but I think that it's important that it came out right before this horrible moment. And I think it's changing the conversation. I really do.
Thank you.
And I think it will continue to do so. And I hope we can find ways to work together with you in the future. And if anybody wants to suppress the film, come to NIPAN and we will help you out in whatever
Great.
way.
Yeah, thank you so much. And actually, there's a really good nod. And I really appreciate that. And yeah, it's as an artist, the fact that anybody's watching the film is amazing. The film came out less than a year ago, and our first screening was like 50 people, and I was like, hey, this is great. And so it's amazing. And to get someone's question again, I work with obviously a lot of anti-Zionists. I also do work with liberal Zionists. I work with J Street. For me, my kind of line is: do you criticize the occupation, and do you acknowledge the Nakba? Those are my lines. That's reality to me. And so again, it's very complex, but what we try to do is, because we're also trying to change hearts and minds, we're trying to move the Jewish community. We work with a wide variety of groups. We work with JVP, we work with If Not Now, we work with J Street, we work with Students for Justice in Palestine, work for Palestine Solidarity Committee. So we're really trying to reach people in a variety of ways. And it's been really cool to see that many progressive Jews across the political spectrum resonate with our film, because no matter where you end up, you all go through that transformation. Most people have gone through that story. So it's important to me that it's a big tent to a certain extent. Although again, people who aren't calling for a ceasefire, it's incredibly disappointing at this point. I am just very disappointed in the organizations that are not calling for a ceasefire. If Ben and Jerry's can call for a ceasefire, I think major Jewish organizations can as well.
I agree with you. I could talk to the two of you all night, and I wish we could break open some wine and do that. But unfortunately, we're going to have to end. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the film. I appreciate your presence here. I think you're fascinating and inspirational people. So thank you both for coming. Joe Sackman is going to give a little bit more information about NIPAN and all the money you can give us and all the support you can give us and how we can all march ahead together. So
thanks, Catherine. And thanks, Rabbi Miriam and Erin, for joining us tonight. This is an excellent film. We've seen this all through the chat. And, it is what NIPAN does. We bring people together collectively to act and to educate and to move things forward. And so we do ask that you make a donation if you can to help us out. It costs money to host these panels and these films and all the work that we do. And there are many other actions you can take, as mentioned in the chat and the links that are there that Ting has been putting. You can look into joining JVP if you want to, or If Not Now, and there's other organizations. Join NIPAN. We do a lot of work throughout New York State to move our electeds in the right direction and to protect those who are fighting along with us, like Jamal Bowman. As you saw in this film, that this is not just an ideology that affects a faith. This is an ideology that affects us politically. And it comes to this here, where we've seen how many of those donors are out there trying to get rid of Jamal Bowman or Jabari Brisport and other electeds here in New York. And NIPAN stands with them and fights with them to get them reelected. So join up, hear about the actions that we have throughout the state. We go beyond just elections. We do climate. We do First Amendment rights. We're out there doing everything. So if you want to be in the middle of progressive politics and the left, become a member. And so I'll leave it at that. Ting, if you could just put the links then again in the chat for everybody. And we'll have a follow-up email with all the other links that were brought up tonight, and any other questions we can also answer. And we will also have a recording of the panel discussion on YouTube in the next day or so. So you'll have that as well to come back and reference, because there's a lot of good information in tonight's discussion. So again, thank you everybody for joining us, and we will see you out in the streets.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Keep
Thank
going.
you all so much. Really appreciate it.
up.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Miriam.
Peace.
We debrief a little bit?
Yeah, no, that would be good, but we might
I
have
think
to.
everyone's still here.
No, I'm happy to debrief with you, Miriam. That would be terrific.
No, 100%, but I think we've still got 100 friends with us.
Right. So we're probably going to go on our private Zoom. We're happy for you to join us there, but you think, Ting, Joe, we should do that? Hello.
I can bring up the other Zoom if you want, but not till this one finishes.
Okay. The credits are great. The music is great. It's a shame not to see it before.